All righty. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today for one of our Reentry Awareness Month events. This is our 7th year of being recognized by the Georgia governor to honor reentry awareness throughout the month. And during this month, in July of every year, we host a plethora of events that are reentry focused or for individuals who are justice impacted in Georgia. My name is Walisha Wilson. I am the founder of New Life Second Chance Outreach. Again, thank you for joining us for one of our Reentry Awareness Month events, voter engagement for individuals to help you and empower you at the polls. As a Georgian, as an individual who is a trans individual, as well as an individual with a felony. All right, Andrea, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to New Life Second Chance Outreach Incorporated's presentation of Know Your Voter Rights, What to Expect at the Polls, Voting as a Trans Georgian, and Voting with a Felony. This presentation, as Wally just stated, is part of our July 2023 suite of events to recognize and honor the 7th annual Reentry Awareness Month for Georgia. My name is Andrea Atkins. I'm a board member of New Life Second Chance Outreach. And our mission is to equip, empower, and restore socially, economically, and civically disengaged individuals that are impacted by an arrest, a conviction, or by incarceration. And we do this through workforce development, job readiness, entrepreneurship training, and voter education so that justice impacted individuals may become whole, productive, self-sufficient, and successful participants of their communities. Today's presentation was born out of a concern that people know their rights and are counted and can navigate the voting process in Georgia. And we have fantastic representatives from 3 organizations in Georgia that promote voting and voter education for a healthy democratic society. First, we will hear from Adam Drucker with Fair Count. Adam will school us in Fair Count's mission. He will impart information about voting and how we are affected by redistricting and ways to stay engaged with voter education and with Fair Count. Next, Chanel Haley with Trans Georgia will inform us about IDs and name changes. She will introduce the Trans Voter Toolkit and discuss some of the challenges her clients are facing and conclude with how Georgia Equality and Trans Georgia are addressing or resolving those challenges. Then Ann Colloton with the Georgia Justice Project will discuss voting in Georgia with a felony or when you owe restitution. And we'll give some information about the termination of probation law, how one becomes eligible under that law, and how to obtain certificates of completion, and what can be done when a PO is incorporated. Please note that with Ann's presentation, there will be no questions regarding legal assistance outside what is presented. However, Georgia Justice Project may be able to answer your questions if you contact them directly. One more thing, please remain muted if you are not presenting, but during this presentation, feel free to drop questions in the chat and they will be answered at Q&A. And actually, one more thing. I just want to put in a plug for our last event for Reentry Awareness Month, which will be Broken Crayon Still Color, Stories of Inspiration. That will take place on July 24th at 6 p.m. Please check our website at NewLife-Second Chance Outreach Incorporated.org or NLSCOINC.org upcoming events to register. All right, and now let's turn our attention to Adam, the Senior Organizing Coordinator for Fair Count Columbus. Take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. Let me share my screen. All right. Okay, hopefully you all can see my screen. Very happy to be here. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give you a presentation about the 3 pillars of democracy, our vision of the 3 pillars of democracy and their interconnectivity, and why it's so important to stay engaged with these 3 pillars. Oh, I can't advance. There we go. So just a little bit about our origin and overview, just some general review of kind of how we began and where we came from. We're a relatively young organization. We were founded in 2019, and we're anchored in Georgia. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that builds long-term power in communities that have been historically marginalized and underrepresented in major civic functions like the census, voting, and redistricting. We work by building long-term relationships and using every available civic function as catalysts for continued civic engagement. We utilize a lot of campaign tactics, door knocking, canvassing, phone banking, one-on-ones, informational events. But unlike a campaign, we are not there for just a season or a couple of months. We are in places around the state year round, and we really focus on what we call sustained, non-extractive organizing. So having a long-lasting relationship and connection to places. And we've had a presence in Georgia, especially rural Georgia, since 2019. Our three pillars, what are they? Our vision of the three pillars of democracy is the census, redistricting, and voting. We really see the census as perhaps the most foundational pillar. This is the count of all people in the country every 10 years. And if there are undercounts, if a community goes undercounted, then they don't receive their fair share of power and they're left underfunded and under-resourced for a generation. Redistricting, second pillar, this is the redrawing of maps that usually happens directly after a census, but can continue on after that. So this is the difference between accessible healthcare, smooth roads and potholes, and solid economic activity. And we want to do everything we can do to kind of make the redistricting process as fair and transparent as possible. And then, of course, our third pillar is voting. We want to get the vote out as much as we can. We particularly organize around Black, Hispanic, and Native American communities and doing everything we can to get out the vote. So just to review our most foundational pillar, the census. So this is the count of everyone living in the United States once and only once, and ideally in the correct place. So this happens every 10 years. The first one was in 1790. The most recent one was in 2020. And we really believe that at fair count, democracy is dependent on a fair, accurate, and complete count in the census. One of the main functions of the census, and I always find this very compelling, is the amount of money and funding that's tied to the census count. So the 2020 census, the count from the 2020 census, will direct roughly 1.5 trillion to more than 300 federal programs. So this is everything from Medicaid, Medicare, Title I grants for school, Head Start programs, foster care funding, disaster recovery. All that is funded by the census count. So when communities go undercounted, they potentially lose out on funding. Often, this is often really visualized for me when I'm doing outreach and I, drive by a Head Start program in a very rural, small town. And I think that, if this town's children go undercounted, then that potentially leads towards less funding for that Head Start program in that town, and the program being under-resourced and underfunded. So that's one of the main functions of the count, is the amount of funding tied to it. Also, the census count leads to reapportionment, determining how many seats each state receives in Congress, and also redistricting. This is the drawing at the state level by state officials of boundaries, everything from political districts to school zones. That's another function that comes from the census.
And wash the plate. But you don't want to kill the ants, like just all of them.
And beyond those three functions, the funding, redistricting, reapportionment, the census also has a lot of other functions: voting rights enforcement, civil rights legislation. The census really provides population benchmarks for nearly every other government effort. So the census count is very expansive in what it leads to. So we really focus on the interconnectivity of all three: the census, voting, and drawing maps, especially beginning with the census. Census data is used to determine how lines are drawn for political maps. If census numbers are inaccurate, significantly undercounted most often, that will lead to inaccurate redistricting and drawing of unfair maps. that potentially limits the voting power of racial minorities. With the census, but particularly with so much of our work at Fair Count, we focus on what has now been, it was called hard to count populations with the census. It's now been renamed to historically undercounted populations. So specifically for the census, we focused on these populations and really doing everything we can to help get these populations more fully counted. You know, and some of these are young children. Children are one of the most undercounted populations in the census. Racial and ethnic minorities, low-income persons experiencing homelessness, LGBTQ persons who don't live in traditional housing. So much of our work with our census really focused on connecting with these populations, and especially in rural places. Fair Count really places a premium on going to places that don't receive a lot of organizing attention, outside of Atlanta, outside of other urban hubs in the state, and going into counties that don't necessarily receive a lot of lift and organizing focus. A general review of the census, the 2020 census, in many ways, the 2020 census in Georgia can be thought of as a success. One of the main reasons it can be viewed that way is our self-response rate from the 2010 census improved in the 2020 census. We were able to exceed our self-response rate from the 2010 census. And that's often, the self-response rate is often, it's the main path you want people to engage with the census, responding themselves. This was a huge challenge for many reasons. The census in 2020 was the first time it was online ever. There was that challenge. It wasn't as lifted up as much of a focus with the administration then. There weren't as many census offices opened. And by far the biggest challenge is something we've all lived through in the past several years, the pandemic and COVID. Trying to do a census during a global pandemic was definitely challenging. But Georgia was able to exceed its self-response rate from 2010, and especially some rural counties were able to kind of get a larger self-response rate from 2010. Another main kind of interesting factor from the 2020 census is our population has grown in Georgia by over 1 million people. And that increase in Georgia made Georgia one of 5 states with the largest population gains. So who was undercounted in the census? African Americans were undercounted by a net rate of about a little over 3%. Hispanic Latinos were undercounted by a net rate about 5%. And that really frames so much of the work that we do at Fair Count, really trying to engage these populations and lift up the importance of the census and get more of these communities involved in the count. Planning is already underway for the 2030 census. It's down the road a bit for sure. It's 2023. It's what, 7 years away, but planning has already begun. It's not as much of a priority in Fair Count's work at this moment, but we are still very much engaged with census work. That kind of looks like what we're doing right now, just keeping it at the forefront of what we're doing when we engage communities, reminding people of the census, educating people around the census, lifting up the importance of the census. And at large, preparation has already begun for the next census. Our second pillar, redistricting. So this is the drawing of boundaries for electoral and political districts. This is the setting up of district lines after reapportionment. It's the drawing of legislative districts. This is what state officials do from political districts to political zones. State officials draw these boundaries. I always find this slide very compelling because this is a list of the varying degrees and types of redistricting. So everything from your congressional districts get redrawn, municipal, city, towns, voting precincts, school board districts, all of that is a part of the redistricting process. And we do everything we can to engage the public around redistricting. We want to do everything we can to engage around all 3 pillars, but the public can and should be involved in making sure fair maps are drawn. And that's mainly because we want to do everything we can to limit and stand up against gerrymandering, which is the manipulation of boundaries of an electoral constituency so as to favor one party or class. We want to do what we can to limit the influence of gerrymandering. And as with all that we do, no matter the pillar, we want to do everything we can to engage communities around these three pillars. So we have varying volunteer opportunities and ways to engage. It looks different for each pillar, for voting, redistricting, the census. We also did a lot of work around pandemic recovery, and we had varying volunteer opportunities and ways to engage. Something we really try to do at Fair Count is bring communities in. Specifically with this redistricting, is we used a program that allowed community members to draw what they visualize as a fair map for their area and provide commentary and details and a story as to why the map that they drew was a fair representation of the type of community they wanted to see. And we collected over 400 of those maps, kind of representations of what communities felt was a fair map for them. And we use them in some of our outreach and programming, but we're always looking to bring community in to kind of rally around the three pillars. Our third pillar, and very much something we're still focused on now, is our Vote 365 initiative. So we launched this in 2021, November 8th, 2021. And this is a sustained 365-day GOTV program, mobilizing voters for elections. And this is something we keep going. 2023 can somewhat be described as an off year in voting. There's no national election, there's no major statewide election, but voting is still happening, often at a very local level. County commissioner races, or there was recently one here in Muscogee County around school board, I believe. So we do what we can to engage voting year round, and encouraging communities to vote no matter what the election is, not just kind of the major elections. Our strategy for Vote 365 and our general plan, and this strategy is emblematic not only of what we do for Vote 365, but what we do in general. We really hire organizers where they are. We have organizers around the state who are from those locations and organizing communities they know. We provide voter education and engagement strategies. We kind of get creative and think of creative ways to engage communities that kind of are maybe non-traditional organizing tactics. We focus on Black, Latinx, and Native American voters in 149 counties outside Metro Atlanta. We don't really organize in Metro Atlanta or the other major cities in Georgia. We really focus on rural places. And specifically with Vote 365, we do everything we can to increase voter turnout in these communities, so that it's in line with the proportion of voters of color in those communities. That's something we call trying to close the vote share gap. So the amount of registered Black voters in a county should be close to the amount of voters that actually turn out. And if there's a large gap, then we do what we can to work to kind of close that gap. This is a tool that we're always lifting up all the time, My Voter page. This is where you can go. It's kind of a one-stop shop to check everything that you need to know around voting. This is where you can go to check your voter registration status, your polling location, early voting locations, everything listed on this slide. So it's a tool that we're always lifting up in our work. And one date that I do want to lift up is March 12th. March 12th, 2024 is the primary election in Georgia. We will be leaning into that with outreach and information, probably beginning definitely possibly even beginning later this year, early next year. And we'll want to see as many folks turn out for the primary election on March 12th, definitely plugged into our whole Vote 365 initiative. We do a lot around election protection too for elections. We partner with other organizations too to kind of plug into poll monitoring, poll watching, and we have organizers around the state. So we're often able to go to counties that maybe don't have as many poll watchers, poll monitors readily available. We also are always having engagement opportunities, volunteer opportunities, informational sessions like this. I think the best place to go to kind of stay on top of those is on our website, faircount.org, the events tab, the volunteer tab. We'd love to have all of you join us for upcoming opportunities. And to close out, this was our motto from the census, but it really is representative of the work that we want to do around civic engagement at large. If you aren't counted, you simply won't count, and we want to make sure everyone counts. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adam. That was a great presentation. If anyone has any questions about that presentation, please put them in the chat so that they can be answered at the end after the other two speakers have given their presentation. And so now we're going to move on to Chanel Haley from Trans Georgia and from Georgian Equality. Got to unmute.
Okay, now you can hear me? Great.
Yes.
Okay, yes, I'm Chanel Haley from Georgia Equality. I'm the the Director of Education and Community Engagement. And I also, outside of my job, also I'm a poll manager. So I have access, as well as anybody does, because actually it is public record, but around the rules, around at the polling place, what is allowed, what is not. And then after these couple slides, I then will show you about how one is able to change their name here in Georgia and what the requirements are for that, okay? So let's go ahead and start off with this first. Okay. So everyone should already know about, hopefully you register to vote, what's required to register to vote. What's in yellow is what a voter registration card looks like. I know that when we do voter registration here at Georgia Equality, there is one thing that we do get that is not a requirement, and that is the phone number, because we do QC, quality control, by checking up to make sure that the person actually did register to vote with us. And people that we hire, our canvassers, are not just in a room somewhere writing down names. This also does protect the voter integrity and also is good proof to have in case the Secretary's office tries to purge a voter or claim that organization has done something incorrectly. When a person is going to go vote, all people, this is what is needed in voter identification. Okay, so government issued identification, passport, that means ID or driver license. There's also some identification cards that could be used if they're from state agencies. Tribal identification is also used, and also military IDs are used. We also then have, if a person does not have the appropriate ID that I just named, and or maybe they registered, we uploaded their information into the poll pad later, then we would ask for the information to the right in order to be able to verify. So that would be a utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck, government documents, or one of the previous listed IDs. So the question is, what is a poll worker checking for? And how does this correspond with a person who maybe has looks different than what is on their driver license because of a gender change or a name change? And so the poll worker has duties to make sure that the voter is officially registered to vote and is voting at the correct precinct. The poll worker does this by comparing the information on the voter ID card or the driver license or ID to the electors precinct list provided by the county registrar. So at the poll office, we get the electronic poll pad, which is everything already uploaded in there. And then we also have a backup of it written out where we can flip through. If the name of your identification document is different than the name of your precinct voter registration list, then that means you are not registered to vote. So let me explain that again. So say, for instance, a trans person, and also people maybe who are married and divorced because your last name originally was, or when you were married was Smith. Now you were divorced and your last name, you didn't use your last name anymore. You had your name officially changed, taken over your driver's license. Your last name is back to being Jones. Then you are not registered to vote anymore because you now need to re-register that new name. And the same thing goes for a trans person that had their name changed also. The image is important, but what is not important is the sex. They're not supposed to be checking the sex and determining whether or not this is the right person or not. That really only comes up if there is two things. One is if this person is a twin, and the other thing is because of our new Georgia law, what most people don't realize is that any elector, meaning any person voting, can challenge another person voting. So what that means is if you and I are standing in line together waiting to vote, and I'm going to go vote, the person behind me can challenge that if I'm eligible to vote or not by telling the poll manager, and then the poll manager can open an investigation about that. And then it'd be up to my responsibility to then prove that I am eligible to vote. But that was in the new Georgia voting right law that was created. And so anyone actually can challenge somebody in line to be able to vote. Luckily, Adam, I'm gonna say this again, about my voter page is how you can always find out about if you are currently registered. It actually tells you on there if your voting status is current or not, if it's incomplete. And what incomplete means is that you registered to vote, but they're missing some paperwork for you. And also, it gives you your polling location as well as what your districts are that you're voting in. You can obviously cannot vote, which I'm sure you'll hear about soon from you cannot vote in Georgia if you are currently serving a sentence for a felony conviction. You are off paper, meaning completed incarceration, parole, probation. You are serving a felony first offender, conditional discharge. Your sentence is complete. Your right to vote automatically is restored. However, I do know that certain counties are slower at getting that back together because you have to re-register and meet other requirements for voting also. There is one more part that I'm missing from here that did not upload. Also, it is your responsibility that when you are given a provisional ballot, so let me explain what a provisional ballot is. At any time that you are going to vote and someone challenge you and says you cannot, or you don't have the right paperwork, they cannot turn you away at all. They can then give you a provisional ballot and let you cast your ballot, which is only for the federal elections. And then it is up to you. They will not call you. They will not ask you. They're not sending a letter in the mail. It is up to you then to go to that county and prove that you are eligible to vote. And that is always on the Friday. Deadline is the Friday after that election. The election's on a Tuesday. By Friday, you have to have turned in the county elections office, the proof that you are eligible to vote in that election, in that district, in that precinct, voting period, whatever the discrepancy was, you have to prove that Friday. And remember, no one again will call you and remind you to do that. So when you're hearing about elections, you're hearing about whatever count for provisional ballots. Well, the first one, they're waiting for 2 days until people have cured what it is that they are supposed to be turning in. This is my contact information, but I'm going to switch out now actually to the part that I think that y'all really want to know about, which is the name change. Everyone wants to know about name changes. So for starters, name change is actually has to be done through a court. And the example that I'm showing you right now is actually Fulton County. The major counties around Metro Atlanta actually have their own paperwork that is accessible through the Secretary of State, the Clerk of Superior Courts, either website or at their office. Okay, so this is what Fulton County looks like. If you live outside of Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, Gwinnett, then you might be using a generic one. And so it would look like this, except it just wouldn't say Fulton County on it. You can pull it though offline though. It's going to be 3 forms. And I'm going to go through each form in just a moment. And then there is a cost associated with it also. Second, one more thing. Just switching up another screen, child. Okay, this one's a little longer. Okay. Screen, well, that's the wrong one. Here we go. That's still wrong. Here we go. Okay. Share screen. Share screen. Okay, good. Okay, name change. So this is also talking about it as an adult, right? But it said you go to Secretary, the Clerk of Superior Court, they will have the paperwork there for you. And when you get that, it's best to actually fill that out there because you will be required to have it notarized. And I know in Fulton County, everyone who works in the clerk's office actually is a notary. And so that's one. Also, there are 2 different fees that come along with getting your name changed. And one is for the advertisement of the publication that you are requesting get your name changed. And the other one is copies. They charge for copies. I think it's $3 per piece of paper that they do it. And you fill out at least 3 different forms. So you do the math there. And then of course, you're going to want your own copies also. So you fill out the petition, prepare your verification forms, and then fill out the notice of petition. Those were the 3 different forms I just showed you. Make sure you sign the documents in front of the notary public, which I said is in the office. You're going to pay for the making copies. You're going to file, which costs money. The publication also costs money. And I'm sure people are wondering, what's the cost? The cost depends on which county you're in, but there is a set minimum that the state has that they're allowed to charge. Then you're going to wait after the 30 days of your publication. You're going to wait to hear a court date to be able to appear in front of court. Now, there is a possibility, usually a slim chance that you could be denied or either again challenged to have your name changed. Things that would challenge is if you are currently, like if you have a criminal case pending right now, they're not going to let you change your name. If they believe that you are trying to change your name to be deceptive, and what that really should fall under, meaning that you are trying to avoid debt. And those really should be only 2 reasons. The other reason has already been beat in court before, where a judge uses their personal preference and decided that, that transitioning and wanting to change your name was deception in itself. But that court case happened here in Georgia, and we prevailed. And so that doesn't really happen here anymore. But I will tell you what does happen. Okay. So there's a hearing, you attend the hearing, the documents that you filled out are presented, then the judge will make a decision then and there, and name is changed. Once you receive the paperwork, your signed documentation, you then want to go to the clerks and make sure you get as many copies as you would like. I always say get at least 6 copies of a notarized certified copy, because remember, then you need to change your driver's license, your social security, your birth certificate, wherever commence that you got to change, your bank, whomever it is that you need to change, they will need copies of this, and many of them do not get the copies back. So one thing I do want to say when it comes to changing your name, though, is that Georgia law allows for discretion. And what that means is that once we went through the legal process of changing one's name through the court system, it's been granted, and you're going to go to the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, to have your ID officially changed on your driver's license. The clerk has the authority to deny that. It is actually, it's written in the law. It is, it's against their actual policy because they actually have a policy manual there about the process of changing one's name with a court order. But what has happened before, particularly when you get to rural areas, is that the clerks that work the DMV will just decide whether or not they believe that you should have this name. You know, I can't say it any other way besides that, but they are absolutely biased and prejudiced at some of them. And so what I always recommend is that just don't make a big fit, just go to another one, because that actual clerk made that decision, which is against protocol. The protocol is supposed to be that if they question your paperwork or why you're having your name changed, which is not of their business, but they would know that because on the actual the name change decree, it does have an excuse of why the name is being changed. So if they question that, they're supposed to get a supervisor, and the supervisor was supposed to then make a decision. But again, the more rural you get is when you start getting challenged. Anyone had these kind of challenges in Fulton County or DeKalb County, they're kind of used to it. Every now and then, there might be some person working there. And then you can go back to the exact same location with a different clerk the next day and get everything going smoothly. So I do want people to be aware of that. And usually when there's a complaint, that's 99% of the time when and why there's a complaint at a DMV or about changing one's name. So is there any questions about that process, the paperwork? You don't, again, on the paperwork that I showed you, there is a line there that actually asks you why you want your name changed. So, which is different than changing one's gender. That question wasn't asked of me. It wasn't that important when it comes to voting. But I will bring up that again, particularly in rural areas, and I'll tell you why in rural areas it is that if a person is challenged because of maybe their image looks different than what they think the gender is on the ID, is because, again, of biases. And the reason why it's in rural areas is because people tend to know each other personally there. And so if a person is coming in, Jane comes in and says that, my name is Jane, the ID says Jane, but the ID still says male, but the coworker working there lives in an area and knows that Jane was actually John, then that coworker will deny. Or again, somebody in line because they know them personally. That's the situation that happens in rural Georgia when it comes to voting. But traditionally, our instructions when working at the polls is not to question around gender at all. Any questions? Are we waiting the questions to the end? Yes. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chanel. If you don't mind, we'll do the questions at the end. That was a lot of information. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to.
No, we're going to move. If anybody's got questions for them during their presentation, let them do that so it won't get confused.
Okay.
Each section have their own Q&A.
Oh, okay. Anyone? Questions?
I had a question if nobody else had one. Okay. Chanel, I'm gonna drop your email in, but I had one question because this happened probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And but when you have individuals who are in the process of transitioning, and I think this was the case with this young man, a trans man wanted to vote. And of course, what he was physically looking like was not what was on the ID. And the poll worker was not only disrespectful, very insensitive and rude, but told them that they could not vote. So what is the process when it comes to voting? Because from my understanding, that may be a long process from having to actually transition, where your physical body is matching what's on your ID. So would you suggest that they just do provisional ballots to avoid any type of disrespect or rudeness at the poll? Or what would your suggestions be if a person hasn't fully transitioned and they don't match what's on their ID?
So a couple things. One is provisional ballots are only done when you show up in person and there's discrepancy. And I always say, never leave without voting. So if you can avoid a provisional ballot, certainly, because then of course you have to then come back and prove who you are, and you're not voting in the entire election. You know, again, you heard about next year is a certain race. Your city council will not be on a provisional ballot. Your commissioner will not be on a provisional ballot. So there's a lot of elections that would not be on the provisional ballot. So you are missing out. So only do on a provisional ballot if you are showing up, they're challenging you. That to me is the last thing. The safest also for a person, particularly many times when someone like you mentioned has been burned before, maybe has anxiety about going to a vote, then absentee voting is definitely a way to go also. Absentee voting, no ID is being shown, to come to their home. They actually are then dropping it off. You're not being challenged anyway that way. So that's the other extreme that one can do if they're uncomfortable. With the situation that you're referring to showing up, that's what I mean by one of the biases that took place because of that particular poll worker. That poll worker was out of line for that. Now, that does not mean that you won't be questioned. And this also has to do with you see who works at the polls many times. It's an older person who doesn't even know what trans is or transition, none of the things are, right? So what I always recommend is when approached with that situation, letting them know ahead of when they're looking and they're asking questions, the transition, this is who I am. Here, I showed you before, you can show 2 pieces of ID to prove whom one is, and then they should let it go, right? That person also, I'm assuming was not the manager, and then she went to the manager, and the manager would have overrode or did the voter registration themselves, because I showed the rules to you. If one ID is in question, if you can prove this ID over here, also the backup, then there's nothing that should stop me from allowing you to vote.
Okay. Thank you. And I think I got it confused when I said provisional ballot as opposed to absentee ballot, which I don't know the difference. So thank you for
absentee is mail voting. Provisional is in person, paper, but only federal. That's all they put on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody else had it. Did anybody else have any questions?
I have a question. Thanks for giving us the guidelines on how many copies we should get. That's very helpful. I was wondering if you had any recommendations about the duration that you should allow for the name change to occur. How long might it take?
Oh, so name change process takes a little over 30 days. So I say a little 30 days because you're going in, but it has to be published in a local paper for 30 days. And after that is when they issue you a court date. So don't expect complete name change before 60 days. And that's from the day of going in, filling paperwork out to getting your final decree.
Thank you.
And if a person wants to change their passport is a little different and a little easier in the sense that all a passport would need is the same paperwork for name changes. As far as the sex on there, just a letter from a doctor stating that you are transitioning. It doesn't have to say that you've had any surgeries or not, that you just are transgender, that's it. The doctor will put in there that you're in an HRT, which means home for therapy, you're transitioning, that's it. There's actually a model letter for that. And that's it. But understanding when you do a passport, that paperwork you send off is gone for 30 days. Anybody who's got a passport knows you actually have to give me your birth certificate, the paperwork, everything, and it goes away. and then they give it back to you. If you're lucky in 30 days, but right now it's like 6 months. So again, if you need copies of everything, and don't give anything away right now if you really need it.
But if you find yourself in a small rural county, doing the federal document, i.e. the passport, might be the best way to go before anything else.
Absolutely, because you won't be denied changing your name, or you won't be denied changing your sex on the passport. But the name change process is the same across the board, because that actually is a state and county. Yeah.
And I think
Thank
before we
you.
go on to the next presentation, I want to just announce that on Saturday, July 29th at 7 p.m., Georgia Equality will host a Cocktails for Equality in Statesboro. This is a free event to enjoy free light bites, drinks, and connect with Georgia Equality's board and staff, who will be on hand to discuss what the LGBTQ community can expect to come out of the state capitol in 2024, and why the South Georgia community will be crucial to the continued fight for full LGBTQ equality in Georgia. They're also honored Dr. Fred Richter with a 2023 Champion for Equality Award for his career efforts to advance fairness, safety, and opportunity for LGBTQ people in Statesboro and all of Georgia. And I dropped the registration link in the chat if you are interested for that as well. And there is an announcement about an event that's going on in Sylvania that Faircount is having, sort of like a community cookout, but I'll drop that later as well. So other than that, won't have any other questions, and we can go to the next presenter. Thank you, Chanel.
Thank you for having me. I hope y'all show up in Statesboro, but don't expect to hear any good news.
Thank you, Chanel. Anne, would you like to take it away?
Sure, let me get my screen. Hopefully, is that working for everybody? All right, well, thank you for having me. My name is Anne Colloton. Whoops, I am the Policy and Outreach Coordinator at the Georgia Justice Project. And so I'm here to talk about some of the common points of confusion and misinformation about voting rights for people who have a felony conviction in Georgia. So just a little bit about the Georgia Justice Project. We do voter education, but that's just a small part of what we do. So we started out as a nonprofit legal, oh my goodness, why does it keep going forward? As a nonprofit legal organization that does, 35 years ago when we started, it was just a holistic criminal defense. So, which is still part of what we do. That work is just in Fulton and DeKalb counties. We represent people with pending criminal cases in Fulton and DeKalb counties. Everyone is paired with not just an attorney, but also a social worker. We support them during their case, any incarceration, long after. Clients that we had 35 years ago to come back for our annual events and are still part of the family. So through those long-term relationships, we got to do a lot more work in reentry space, because we realized that once someone's sentence is complete, they still are facing barriers after that. And so we got involved in some policy work that hopefully are removing some barriers. We've been a part of 22 law changes in our history. The last 3 have been related to driver's license suspensions, early termination, which I'll talk more about later, and expungement. So on the reentry side of things, we do some work at the Metro Reentry Facility, and we're probably most well known around the state for our record restriction work, which is expungement, which is if people have been off paper for a few years, often they're eligible for some sort of record restriction so that when they go to apply for a job or housing, those convictions or arrests won't continue to show up in public. We also do help with early termination of probation, which I'll talk about again as it relates to voting. So when we're talking about felony convictions and voting, felony disenfranchisement is indeed a thing. It's a problem. It's been around for a long time, since the 13th Amendment was passed. So, and that has led to, currently there's about 200,000 people in Georgia who cannot vote because they're serving a sentence for a felony conviction. About 1/3 of those people are incarcerated and 2/3 are on supervision. So they're out in the community, working, paying taxes, but still are not able to vote. And so again, when we're talking about early termination of probation, it's very much related to that. So that is something we need to work toward. But in the meantime, while we're working to end felony disenfranchisement, our office chooses to focus on the people who are eligible to vote now and making sure that they know their rights and that they know they are eligible to vote. That's about 450,000 people who have a felony conviction on their record, but are eligible to vote because their sentence is complete and often don't know that. So our work is trying to make sure that that group of people knows that they are eligible to vote. So what I think adds to a lot of the confusion is that every state has their own voting rights, right? And so we might hear things on the news about another state and think that's what it applies to us. But just to make it clear, Georgia's voting laws are very distinct from any other state. And if I have a conviction, let's say from Maine, okay, that's that blue state way up in the top right? So you don't lose your voting rights there at all. Even if I'm incarcerated for a felony conviction, I can vote when I'm in Maine. So, but let's say I'm in Maine, I have a felony conviction, I get out and I'm on parole or probation and I move to Georgia. They transfer my probation and I'm on supervision in Georgia. Even though I could have been voting in Maine, if I'm now living in Georgia, Georgia's voting laws are what dictate whether I can vote or not. And so in Georgia, I have to be off paper, done with my probation and parole sentence before I can vote. But the other way around, if I have a conviction in Georgia and my supervision is transferred to Maine, I can vote no matter what in Maine. So again, what Georgia's voting laws are dictates who can vote in Georgia. So what are Georgia's voting laws? That's what we're going to talk about today, is what does it mean to be off paper in Georgia? We're going to talk about the exception for people sentenced under the First Offender Act. We're going to talk about fines and fees and the confusion around that. How do you know your sentence is complete? And then early termination of probation. So who can vote in Georgia? So anyone who is not currently serving a sentence for a felony conviction. Oh my goodness, I don't know what's wrong with my screen. So as soon as someone's sentence is complete, they can vote. So off paper means that they have completed prison time, probation, or parole, including any time on non-report or unsupervised status. So even if you're not reporting anymore, but you still are under sentence on probation, you can't vote until that ends. But as soon as your sentence is complete, your right to vote is automatically restored. So I just want to clarify that the right to vote is automatically restored. The ability to vote takes that step on your part to register to vote again. So even if you were registered before felony conviction, you were removed from the voter rolls, you have to take that step to re-register, but your right to vote is automatically restored. So, and also to clarify, you do not need your record expunged or pardoned or any other step other than completing your sentence and registering before you can vote again. So a pardon, there is something on the pardon application that talks about restoring your civil and political rights, but that's not a voting. That refers to firearm rights, running for political office, serving on a jury, and being a notary public. But you do not need an expunged record or pardon record in order to vote. Another thing a lot of people don't know about is if you are serving a sentence under the First Offender Act or have a felony conditional discharge sentence and your status hasn't been revoked, you can vote while under that sentence. There are about 40,000 people who are serving a first offender sentence right now in Georgia who are eligible to vote. And a lot of people don't know that. So those of you who do voter education canvassing, spread that word wide, because that is a large group of people who could be voting and often don't know it. If someone is in jail, as long as they're not serving a sentence for a felony conviction, they can vote. So if someone has been arrested and charged with a felony, but have not pled or have not been to trial or convicted of a felony, as long as they're not under sentence for a different one, they can vote. It's obviously difficult to vote when you're in jail because you have to get access to the absentee ballot and things like that, or register and get access to your ID to register. But it is possible, especially if you have help on the outside from a friend or someone who can access that information for you. And misdemeanor convictions don't affect voting rights at all. So again, once a felony probation or parole sentence is complete, the person just has to re-register and then they can vote. So what about fines and fees? We often get that question, right? And especially after Florida last year when everybody was getting arrested and on the news in Florida. Big show, right? And it was a very effective scare tactic, not just in Florida, but everywhere else. So, but I just want to make it clear that in Georgia, this is new guidance on the Secretary of State's website. It says that if your sentence is complete, you can vote, okay? And it says if your sentence is complete and you've paid your fines, you can vote, but it goes on. Don't just stop there. Read the next sentence and it says, all fines that are a condition of probation are automatically canceled upon completion of probation. And by default, in Georgia, all fines and fees are collected by the Department of Community Supervision, that's the probation office. And so they are by definition a condition of probation. So if you are on probation and your sentence is complete, your fines have been canceled and you can vote. The Secretary of State's website also says, right after that sentence, it says restitution, fees, costs, surcharges also don't impact your voting rights as your sentence is complete. So again, the question is your sentence complete? If it is, you can vote. And how do you know, right? Most people know if their sentence is complete, but not everybody. Some people get confused because they're like, I've been on non-report for 8 years. I don't know, So if you're not sure, there are ways you can get documentation for peace of mind, right? You can, sometimes if somebody registers and for some reason they're flagged, no, you can't register because you have a felony conviction, then we say, get one of these things and show that to the registrar's office and they'll let you, they should finish allowing that registration. But if you want peace of mind before you register, you can get this if you want. Again, it's not required. But there's 3 things you can get. You could ask the Department of Community Supervision, that's probation office, for a certificate of sentence completion. You can ask any probation office in the state to give you one of those. They can look it up in their system, no matter where you are under supervision, where you live now. Sometimes the probation officer will send an email or write a letter on their letterhead saying, Ann Colloton, here's her date of birth, her sentence ended on this date, she should be able to vote. Or if your probation was terminated through the court and you have a court order signed by the judge that says your probation ended, that's your proof too. So you don't need all of these. You don't even need any of them. But if you want something, you just need one of these. You don't need all 3. They all serve the exact same purpose. So speaking of probation, as I said, there's about 200,000 people who are disenfranchised because of a felony conviction, and 2/3 of them are on probation. So Georgia has the longest probation sentences in the country and more people on probation than any other state. So we're really fortunate that 2 years ago, there was a new law passed that allows more people to be eligible for early termination. If they're doing well, there's no reason that they should stay on probation. So this new law says that if you've served at least 3 years on probation, you've not had any new arrests other than for a non-serious traffic offense, you have not had your probation revoked in the last 24 months. And by revoked, I don't mean a technical violation. I mean revoked to a facility for some period of time. And you've paid all restitution, which does not include fines and fees. It's just restitution that was court ordered to a victim. Many cases don't have restitution, some do. So if your case had any restitution that was, needs to be paid before you're eligible for early termination under this new law. But remember, restitution does not need to be paid in order to vote if your sentence is complete, right? If you served your whole probation sentence, still weren't able to pay all your restitution, but you're off paper, you can still vote. That's what the Secretary of State website says. But if you would like to get off probation early under this new law and you have restitution, you do have to pay the restitution before you'd be eligible for early termination under this law. So if you think you meet that criteria of the 3 years and those 3 other criteria, what should you do? Just know that you should not hire a lawyer. You don't have to pay a lawyer to help you. There should be something that you can do on your own. So the first step is to talk to your probation officer or the probation officer in your county. So if you're like, I've been on non-report for 5 years, I have no idea who my PO is, I haven't been in touch with them in a long time. I believe that Willisha has a link to find the probation office in your county, and you can look that up. So call that office or the officer and say, I believe I qualify for early termination, you know, say I've been on probation for this long and I meet these 3 other criteria, and I'm wondering if you've submit an order to terminate on my behalf. Talk to them if they haven't, if there's any problems with that, then you can email this email address at the Department of Community Supervision, and they will then, you know, push it back down from the high ups to the local probation office to try to move that along. Again, if that has problems, then you can reach out to Georgia Justice Project and we can help intervene and make that, move that along as well. Our website that I believe Willie's just going to put in the chat will in a couple of days have some more specific like self-advocacy tools about like when you're calling your probation officer, what do you say, what language do you use, what words do you use, so that they can so that they know, and that you can ask them, well, if you haven't done this, then what? And so that information will be on our website in just a few days to help you. So, and again, if your probation ends, then you just have to re-register and you can vote. So just to recap, you know, if you or someone you know says, well, I can't vote because I have a felony conviction, first question that you ask is your sentence complete? If it is, you can vote. If it's not complete, you ask, are you sentenced under the First Offender Act or conditional discharge? If you are and your status hasn't been revoked, you can vote while serving that sentence. You don't have to wait for it to end. Or if that doesn't apply to you either, then the third question is, well, how long have you been on probation? If you've been on probation for more than 3 years, you might qualify for early termination. Talk to probation officer. And if you get off probation early, you can register to vote. And these are really great two-sided postcards or handing out cards that we have. So be happy to send them to anyone who wants to use them in their community. One side is about voting, one side is about early termination. Just send me an email and we'd be happy and at your address, and we'd be happy to mail you as many as you could share. And here are some QR codes. If anybody learned that they are eligible to vote, didn't know that they were before, use that QR code to register. And there's my contact information. And on our website, there's really good information about both voting and probation on the website. And I think that's it. I wasn't able to see the chat, so are there any questions for me?
I think there are quite a few. Well, Alicia, do you want to do this part?
There was one question. Let me go back up to it. One question said, and you may have already answered, said that she's a justice impacted person who brought it to her supervisor. How could I approach others who are? The information you're giving is excellent. What is a good opening question that I could add, that I could use to ask an individual if they are on paper?
Mm-hmm. Do you mean like you're a voting canvasser and somebody's like,
Yes.
yeah, I don't want to vote, and you
Yeah.
wonder? Well, first of all, don't say, are you a felon? Don't
Yes. label
somebody that. So there's a lot of different ways you can refer to that. I mean, I think the most kind of I've heard, and Willie, you can share. I mean, one person told me that they said, well, you know, if it's because of a legal issue, a lot of people don't know, you know, if they have a felony conviction, that they can vote as soon as their sentence is complete, or just, you know, kind of refer to it as a legal issue. And then people might go, oh yeah, or just say, if it's a legal issue, here's this card, and they might walk away and then come back and ask you later or something like that. You can leave them with that card that I mentioned that then they can follow it that way.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned Florida and the scaremongering around that. My question is about registering to vote if you are not supposed to vote.
Yes.
What are the penalties? How to avoid it? Can you give us some information on that, basically?
10 years.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's scary. I mean, I think that peace of mind, if your sentence is complete, but you want peace of mind, just get that documentation from DCS, from probation, that says my sentence is complete. That's peace of mind. If you know you're still on paper, don't register, because that is a felony. I know plenty of people who get what they call the felony letter. Like they register, they think that they're eligible. It's an honest mistake. They just didn't know they're on, let's say they're on unsupervised. They thought that meant their probation was over and they were eligible to vote. So they registered. They get sent the quote felony letter, which is a standard letter all across the state. And it says you can petition and have a hearing. But really, in my experience in the last few years, all you need to do is bring the certificate of sentence completion or something that says I'm off paper, and then they'll push it through. And I'm happy to get on the phone with anybody and talk to them to help with that too. But so I don't know anyone who's been arrested in Georgia for mistakenly registering. Of course, that can happen. So if you know you're not eligible, please don't register. If you register by mistake, I think you'll get that felony letter, and then we can, if it's a mistake, we can help resolve that.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of expound on that as well, because a lot of people don't know, and I bring this up all the time when I'm speaking about it. It can literally be a sentence of up to 10 years for registering while you vote. And I do know that people in other states, New York, other places, people have actually registered and gone to jail. So, and the thing about it is, to me, as a justice impacted person, when I went to go see my PO for the first time, these are things that should be laid out, period. They should tell you up front what you can and can't do, but the only thing they focus on is you don't need to hang around other felons. That ain't got nothing to do with me being locked up for registering to vote. Tell me what I need to do to stay out of jail. And these are things that POs should tell people. You are on paper. You may be unsupervised, but this still means you're on paper. You're not able to vote. You're not able to carry a gun. You're not supposed to socialize with other people with felonies. It should be very clear. There are a lot of folks walking around, and the thing about it also, in places that are government buildings, they are not educated. And I have a problem with it, because at the DMV and public libraries, which a lot of people go to, a lot of poor people visit, and they have these things that say you want to register to vote. Nobody pays attention to it, especially when you go into the DMV. They simply give you this form and a clipboard. They tell you to complete this form out so you can be called by the next person. On the back of the form, while you're checking and you're signing in very, very tiny letters, I don't even think it's 8-point Times New Roman, it says that if you register to vote while you're currently on a felony probation, you could be getting 10 years of sentence. But it's on the back of the thing after they've already told you. And after I had to take a client in to get their ID, the girl at the door, I asked her, why did you give her that? Because I just told you he got out of prison. She said, well, I didn't know you couldn't vote in Georgia. You could not vote in Georgia with a felony. So part of the problem is people who are handing this stuff out to people, they are themselves are not even educated. And people don't even know that by going to the DMV, signing the back of the sheet, what they should be doing is highlighting it or making it bigger, that by you signing that, you're literally putting yourself at risk, and also at the libraries where they're getting you to register to vote. So I just want folks to know that as well. And I think Chanel had a question.
I had two questions, because these are two exclusions when it comes to being able to vote. What is a conditional discharge? Like your sentence, but
yeah, it's not considered a conviction. So if you're sentenced under the First Offender Act, or your sentence, if your sentence is, it's another loophole, I think, for like, suburban white kids who they say made a mistake, it's like another second chance. So, but if you have one of those sentences, it's not considered a conviction unless the status gets revoked. So you can vote while you're under sentence. So if it would be on the sentencing paperwork, it would say First Offender Act. Some sentencing paperwork has all these check boxes, and so it'll have the First Offender Act on there. It'll have conditional discharge, but you have to look at what box was checked about what the sentence is.
So both of those are different. Felony first offender is different than conditional discharge.
They're different laws, but they're a same status in terms of voting. Yeah, and once you're completed those sentences, it's not a conviction on a record. It's an arrest on a record, but it's not a conviction on a record.
Okay, and then, but they both are felonies, even though it's like for a small period of time. Is that getting that
Yeah,
right?
but they're not a felony conviction, so only people who are serving sentence for a felony conviction can't vote. So it's not just a felony sentence, it's a sentence for a felony conviction. And first offender sentences and conditional discharge sentences are not considered convictions, even though they're felony sentences.
Okay, I'm
So that's
asking
the
particularly,
distinction.
yeah, I'm asking because I think that, obviously a lawyer would knows the difference, but as
Mhm.
I'm going out and registering people to vote, right, and ask them like the question that was asked earlier, they would, to them, they might say that they have a conviction because it was a felony and not know that it was conditional or first
Condition.
offender. So I'm trying to, I want to make sure I'm asking or saying it correct
Right,
for
right.
someone that had a lawyer do everything for them, which is probably why they got that anyway, because we don't get
Yeah.
that if we don't have a lawyer.
Yeah, well, they can always, we're happy to talk at our office. They can call me, my extension, and I help people through that. I mean, it would be on their sentencing paperwork.
Okay.
And, and somebody's first felony is not the same as the First Offender Act. That's one
Oh,
distinction. But it would say on their sentencing paperwork, and that would be the thing I would say, look at your sentencing paperwork. If you don't have it, go get it and show it to me, and we'd just have to look at the sentencing paperwork.
okay, thanks.
Sure.
I just I think you just answered the point that I was going to make. And, in the prison law library all the time, I talk to people who thought they were sentenced under the FOA, even though they weren't, because it was their first time being arrested or their first time with a felony conviction. So that distinction is important. Thank you.
Right.
And I think my last thing I wanted to do, I know you spoke about it briefly, but I also wanted to, just in case people came in late and did not understand or hear you, you can vote while you're in jail. Although some Georgia jails, they make it really hard for you to vote while you're in jail. You can vote if you're in jail and you have not been sentenced. Now, there are folks that are in jail who have been sentenced. And if I'm telling me if I'm something wrong, I might have to go to law school like you and Lucy. But
I'm not a lawyer, Lucy.
okay, yeah, you can vote in jail. And a lot of people give you a hard, challenging time when you try to get folks in jail to vote. If you have not already been sentenced, and over 60% of the people currently sitting in jail hadn't even been to court and they haven't even been sentenced. Therefore, and not saying if you've already got a felony and now you're in there for something else that might be a misdemeanor, you still can't vote because you have a felony. I'm talking about you're sitting in jail and you don't have a felony, you have a misdemeanor on your record, and when it comes time to vote, you should be able to vote. So, Ann, can you tell us if for some reason I had a loved one in the county jail, don't have a felony, they're there for a misdemeanor, they just simply can't bail out, it's voting time. What do I do as a loved one to get my loved one's vote to the ballot?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Well, the first thing is they have to register, right? And so that might be the hardest part. So they have to get the voter registration form. Some jails do voter registration in the jails, but that's really depends on the county, depends on how cooperative they are. But they have to register first, and then they have to get an absentee ballot. So again, you have to have that ID. If it's your first time voting, and somebody else who's the voting expert here can help, but I know if it's your first time voting absentee, I think you have to also send in a photocopy of your ID. So if it's their first time registering while in jail and the first time voting absentee, or first time voting period, and it's absentee from the jail, I think you have that extra step of needing to get a photocopy of your ID, which might be locked away in the jail somewhere. But again, it is possible, it is legal, it just is going to need some help from either a very helpful staff person at the jail or from a family member on the outside.
So are sheriffs able to deny you that right? Or if somebody says, I want to bring this voter registration form to my nephew, please have him sign it, give it back to me. What's the process if somebody does that and they say the sheriff says I can't, they won't allow us to do it?
Yeah, that again, I think it's so dependent on the facility and how cooperative the staff is. They have different rules on what kind of paper, some places only
Yeah.
do the postcard, some people do mail by letter, so it really depends on the
Okay.
facility.
I think it was
Just wanted to point
Andrea,
out
and
that the
then-
If they have
ID
a chaplain or a counselor, sometimes they can be more helpful than the warden, or more, able to facilitate something like that. If
Okay.
they're focused on helping rather than security, that would be my suggestion.
Okay, I think Andrea and then Richard had a question.
Yeah, I actually wanted to switch directions a little bit. So if Rick, you want to go ahead and ask your question, or I could do that for you.
Oh, I'll do it. Let me turn the video on, I guess. So if the incarcerated person, not a felony,
Mhm,
is already a registered voter,
mhm,
they wouldn't have to register again,
correct.
but they may not be, depending on where they are, they may not be in the county in which they are registered. So
two things.
we're
Yeah.
still talking, we're still
Yeah.
talking an absentee ballot, but they'd have to apply
Correct.
it from whatever home county, because they're not going to consider the jail their permanent residence.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
Different
So the
scenario.
first thing is that the question about ID and a person who voted before. So your jail ID is state issued ID.
Oh,
They give you ID when you're
Nice.
either you keep your ID or they give you ID while you're there, because you have to have ID in jail so they can identify you. You carry it with you all day, every day, everywhere you go. Okay, so there's that. The second thing you're right, is that you can only vote for the district that you are registered and live in. People, we do it all the time, anywhere. If you move tomorrow and there's an election the day after, chances are you didn't go and re-register because you're past the deadline to be able to vote where you live at now. But you will probably go to your old precinct and vote, and you could only vote for what is on that block there. So it's the same thing as you were if you was incarcerated in a jail. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I have a question about, I have a question maybe that Adam, well, I have a question for Adam, which is, I was wondering if he could talk a little bit more about the voter share gap and what strides have been made with that in recent years, or if, the next election is what's needed in order to actually get a metric. But also I was wondering, while I have a bunch of concerned people who are concerned about voting on the screen, there has been a report, and thanks to Rick Parker and Pam Parker for sharing this with me, about Brad Raffensperger is planning to purge another 200,000 voters. What is a strategy for figuring out, it's people who have been inactive in the last 2 elections, so not very long. What's a strategy to start finding all of those people and bringing them back into enfranchisement?
You're asking, is there currently a strategy for it? Is that the question?
Yes, and or can we brainstorm one?
I was just told recently that Adam or Walisha, Adam, I think you might know this answer, in the sense that there is an actual list of knowing when a person is off papers and eligible to register to vote that was a convicted felon before. There is actual list of that. And advocates do have the ability to receive that list. I know it came up outside of work with the Democratic Party. We had a discussion that list should be coming to us because I live in Clayton County. There was, I think, a total of 24,000 recent individuals in Georgia that are becoming eligible to be registered to vote in Georgia off papers, or that have been convicted of a felony sometime in their life. And so that then needs to be divided up about actual, like, the counties itself. However, I don't currently have that list now, but that list does exist. And I think that's the path. When you get that list, that's how you re-engage people and let them know, like, hey, did you not know? I know when I was in Fulton County, people that were purged, what we did is that we actually contacted them. So they're supposed to be contacted if they're purged anyway. That actually is the rule. But then they weren't being that way. So we actually took the steps of actually calling them ourselves and saying, hey, because there's a hearing for purging. Purging is supposed to happen. It's supposed to be a list of names called, and then they're supposed to show up to be able to defend themselves. And they wasn't doing that.
I just want to jump in real quick. First, just to backtrack a little bit, and I have those cards. Thank you. They have been really useful. It's surprising how often it comes up in outreach, going door to door, just out in the communities. Oh, I don't need to reach out to me. I can't vote. I have a conviction. Having something like this that's like succinct and summed up has been really useful. I just used this yesterday in rural Southwest Georgia. It came up in conversation. So definitely put me on the list for more.
Okay. All right.
I will send you
Well, send me an email with your address. Yeah, we would be happy to send any out because we're not a canvassing organization. We're mostly a law office. But we made that information and we're happy to share it with any organization who will help get it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Speak up, Sam.
Well, we have to get the list first.
Well, hold on, just.
And yesterday wasn't even a canvassing situation. It was just a focus group in a small rural county that kind of came up in that, and just having that was really useful. To speak a bit to what Andrea was saying about vote share gap. So actually this map behind me, you can see is we hit, this is from last year, and we organize a lot around Black vote share gap. And that is the amount of registered Black voters in a county versus the amount of voters that actually come out. And we've kind of scored all the counties. This was for last year. We've kind of scored all the counties based on vote share gap. And the purple counties have the highest vote share gap, and then red has next highest level, orange next highest level, yellow next highest level. And we really kind of did everything we could to focus primarily on counties that had a lot of vote share gap, very rural places, and doing what we could to kind of close that vote share gap. That'll be, as far as I know, that'll be very similar to our strategy for next year as well, and a lot of the organizing we do around voting. Good question, Andrea, about what it will look like for next year. I think in some ways, I think we're still analyzing the data from last year and strategizing where we need to go, because it might shift a little bit, kind of places that might now have more vote share gap than before or what have you. But yes, you kind of we'll still kind of have that strategy around vote share gap and identifying where it is the highest. And I think Chanel kind of summed up everything well around purge voters, and what could potentially be done there. It essentially would just need to be like kind of targeted outreach to that group with directions, with what they needed to do, identifying those voters, reaching out to them, having a targeted script, targeted next steps. We at Fair Count do not do voter registration, but we can kind of direct where they would need to go or give them the information they might need.
Is Fair Count even allowed to?
No, go ahead.
A quick question. Is Fair Count even allowed to hand out voter registration forms?
Good question. And my answer would be, let me follow up.
I was going to say something. You asked a question earlier about purging, and some people are from my understanding that the most recent purge was people who were inactive status, right, for not having voted, not necessarily a big purge of people who have felony convictions. And I'm not sure what the list is, people were talking about, but I do know that DCS communicates every day with the Secretary of State to flag and unflag people based on a conviction or a sentence completion. But the other thing, sometimes people say, well, I want the list of people who completed their sentence and are eligible now because I want to go knock on their door. And that, it would be great if we could get that to voting rights organizations. But if that list was publicly available to a voting rights organization who wants to use it for a good purpose, that means that that list would be available for any other group who wants to use it for a bad purpose, such as to discriminate against people who are living in certain neighborhoods. They don't want somebody with a felony conviction in that neighborhood. And so anyway, that list is not publicly available, for better or for worse. It's not available. Sometimes it would be nice to have that list, but many times it's not good to have that list floating around. So but I would just say that there are so many people with felony convictions in Georgia. We have more people who are under some form of correctional control than any other state in the country. And so you are bound to talk to people who have a felony conviction, whether whether they want to admit it or whether you think they do or not. I think that anywhere you go, you're bound to talk to somebody who has a conviction or knows somebody with a conviction. And so share that information as widely as possible, because the more it's spread, the more other people will hear about it.
So you're saying the state of Georgia, knowing, for one, is it 5 years or 10 years? And are you saying that the state of Georgia does not send you a letter and say, hey, Walisha, you haven't registered with us since so-and-so and so-and-so. If you don't register in the next election, we're going to remove your name from the roll. They don't send you some kind of warning letter?
Well, it's not registering, it's voting. And I would defer to Chanel or Adam. I mean, I think that from what I understand, if you haven't voted in a couple election cycles, then you're considered inactive. And I think the reason is they say, well, you haven't voted, you may have moved out of state, you may have moved somewhere else. So your registration information might be outdated, something like that. But
so it's literally a use it or lose it thing when it comes to voting.
I mean, somebody else knows better than me, but that's my general understanding.
Yes, it's 2 presidential election cycles.
So if you go 8 years.
Yes, you're inactive.
And do they send you a letter?
So they used to send you a letter. And again, there used to be where you could show up to the hearing, because the elections board for each county would have a hearing because they read all the names. And then you would say, hey, no, I still want to stay. Now they don't really do that anymore. I'm not certain they're supposed to, but they don't. There was a time when they did.
Okay. Dang.
I had a question, Anne, about your office. I'm only asking where your office is, and if knowing where your office is, would I be able to pick up those cards in person, or you could only mail them out?
No, yeah, if you want to come by, we're on Edgewood Avenue, 438 Edgewood Avenue, right behind the King Center.
That's what I thought. I remember seeing it. Yeah, on the strip.
Yeah,
what's
we're
the
there.
Hours?
We're there at least 9 to 5, maybe it's 8:30, except for on Fridays. Not always there in the afternoon, but somebody should be there.
Okay, great to
And
know.
tell me how many you want, and I can just put them aside for you at the front desk.
And we have Pam Parker who has a question.
I was just going to say that there's another way that you end up on that purge list if you show up on the National Change of Address database, which is notoriously unreliable. So
5% are based on that.
What do you mean? Like if you go get your change of address through the post office?
Yep. And it especially affects college students and the military. It really affects the military because they move a lot. So that's why it's really important to get these lists. And our election supervisor gives them to us. And we do reach out to these people. And they're very surprised.
Andrea, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't have a question. I'm Andrea from the Poor People's Campaign in Georgia. I just wanted to say you guys gave me so much information. Mine blown. Thank you so much. This was such an awesome Zoom. I didn't expect to learn so much. And so I just wanted to say to everybody, like, oh my gosh, thank you. Wrote
Thank
down
you.
some stuff.
How did you hear about this event, Andrea?
Miss Nina from the Poor People's Campaign let me know. And so
Okay.
she said to jump on. And I'm the tri-chair here in Warner Robins over the Poor People's Campaign. I didn't really know what it was about. But then when you guys started, I was like, what? Oh, wait,
Yeah.
you can vote in jail. I just learned
Yeah.
so much from with the trans and different things on the ID that I just didn't even think about, and so it was just really well. So that was just me. Just want to tell y'all,
Well,
y'all
thank
did a good
you.
job. And
This is
enjoyed it.
why we do the work that we do. We exclusively at New Life Second Chance work with individuals in Georgia who are justice impacted. And so
Yeah.
we do it throughout the year, but Reentry Awareness Month has been in July for the past 7 years.
All right.
And we got that proclamation through the governor. We do it every year because we feel like it's something that should be longer than a day or a week. And so that is what we do on our YouTube page. If you can go back years of a lot of the events that we do. We have one more event that we'll be doing on the 24th called Broken Crayons, and we'll have an all formerly incarcerated panel of women who are lawyers, success, licensed parents therapies, business owners. We've had entrepreneurship workshops. We just feel that's what we are about. I'm formerly incarcerated. 70% of our board of directors is formerly incarcerated. And so that is what we do in our missions around educating folks. And that involves voting. And so that is what we want to make sure we get the word out and do what we need to do. And we aim to please by asking folks to make sure that we have great presenters that give very informative information. I think we've had a great opportunity. We have reached our time, but we would love you all support. We are all volunteer organization. I started this organization when I got out of prison 12 years ago. None of us receive a salary, so we're always in need of donations. We currently have fundraisers going now where we want to assist individuals by helping them get IDs, pay for their birth certificates. We also assist folks with paying their college application fees, just things like that. Just as impacted folks if they got a job, but they're running a little short on groceries or need a light bill paid. And these are things that a lot of us have done of our own pocket. And so we're asking supporters to support us on that. Like I said, we don't take a salary. We do this because we love what we do. And we believe everybody deserves second chances, regardless of what they've done. Everybody deserves the right to vote. The vote should never be taken from people. I could see them even remotely trying to take the vote from you because you've done some type of voter fraud. You've done something like that. But simply because you've done a crime or committed some criminal act has no bearing on the right to vote. And just as Ann said, Georgia has the most people on correctional control. What is it? 300,000 or 400,000 folks currently with a felony conviction in Georgia. Is that right, Ann? And you have folks now, because of the new early termination of probation law, people are now eligible to vote if you've been on probation 3 years, and to get your probation terminated early. Those are the folks we need to be reaching, and not just in the main areas, in these rural areas as well, because that is the first thing people say is, oh, I can't vote, I got a felony. No, you actually may be able to vote. The question is not, do you have a felony? The question is, are you currently on probation or parole? That is the question. And if they say, no, I've been on probation for 10 years, that means they have gone 10 years without voting. And also to let anybody know that because you currently cannot vote does not mean that you cannot be civically engaged. I was unsheltered at some point. I was on probation, but I was still taking people to the polls. I was still educating folks. So we can still do our part to make sure that people's voices are heard at the polls. So thank you all so very much. We have reached the conclusion of our program. Andrea, did you want to say anything?
Check out our website at nlscoinc.org. You can donate, you can sponsor, and you can advocate. And that website has how to register for the next event, Monday, July 24th, 6 p.m. Broken Crayons, Still Colors, Stories of Inspiration. Join us then and join us on the website.
And we will make sure that Ann's presentation as well as Adam's presentation, and if Chanel wants to get her presentation, we will make sure we have this sent out to you. We are closed on Mondays and Fridays, but I'll work a little later today to try to get this out to everybody who showed up so that you can have that as well as the chat links. Because if you're like me, you're probably frantically trying to write down and copy and paste and open up all these tabs. I'll make sure everything that was dropped in the chat will be emailed to you all. And all those relevant links. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. It's always a pleasure of having Georgia Justice Project, Fair Count, and Georgia Equality to partner with us to be able to bring you all relevant information. Thank you all so very much. And for those of you who are justice impacted or work with justice impacted people, you can always email us to get on our email list, because we send out felony friendly resources. So that's felony friendly employer job openings, housing openings. Even though we don't get many in, we do have some landlords that do that. And this is one of those things that went out. If there's a new Georgia law that relates to people with criminal records, anything about voting, that's where we send it out from. So if you want to be added to that list, please email us at office@nlsconc.org. And we'll make sure we get that added out to you. But other than that, you all have a great day. Be blessed. Continue to believe in second chances and stay safe and healthy.
And thanks again to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.